Okay, this is installment 2. So what so far has happened is that Helen has been kidnapped from Sparta, kidnapped in quotations, by Paris, and brought back to Troy to live as his wife. Immediately, Helen's husband Menelaus, down here in Sparta, he calls upon his brother Agamemnon in Mycenae, right about here, and they gather up all of the kings who had at one point wanted to marry Helen themselves in Greece, but obviously had not been chosen, but still must follow through with the oath that they have given always to protect Helen. Now, they gather at Aulis with all of the thousands of ships, hundreds of ships, and they are now going to make preparations for war. Some of them, like Agamemnon, saw this as an opportunity in order to be able to take the riches of Troy and thus shed so much of that innocent blood. They immediately realize that one is not there. And as a matter of fact, it is the very person, the very king who had come up with the idea of the oath. That was Odysseus. He was on his island of Ithaca, a teeny tiny island way over here. He had just recently had a child with his wife, Penelope. Odysseus and Penelope had the child Telemachus, who was an infant son, and it had been prophesied that if Odysseus went and fought in this war, he would be away from home for 20 years, because the war itself is prophesied to last 10 years, and it would then take another 10 years for Odysseus to get home. So, to trick the Greeks who came to get him, he decided what he would do was act crazy. He plowed his fields in a catatonic manner, acting as though he did not understand anybody when he was addressed, or anything at all. And so, one of the Greeks was not fooled. His name was Palamedes. And Palamedes decided that he would test Odysseus, took his little infant son Odysseus' son Telemachus, and placed him right in front of the plow to cause Odysseus to run him over. But as soon as he got near to his child, he turned the plow aside. And after doing it this a couple of times, he had been found not to be insane. So Odysseus is now on board. Next, they know that they must have the greatest warrior in all of Greece, a fellow by the name of Achilles. If you remember, Thetis, that Nereid, whose wedding party to be married to Peleus had caused the trouble with the 3 goddesses and, of course, the golden apple, they had a child together, and sure enough, the prophecy was true, for the son is going to be born greater than his father Peleus. It was Achilles. Now, the story goes initially, Thetis wanted to make her child immortal where he would not die. And so she took the baby when Peleus was asleep and put him in the fireplace and began to roast the baby. But the baby was not dying. What she was doing was cooking out the mortal parts. But when Peleus came and found and woke up to see what they were doing, he kicked them out of the house, which meant now Achilles was one day going to die. He was going to be mortal. And so she does the next best thing. Now, if you read Homer, Homer makes no mention of Achilles' invulnerability. But you must understand that there are lots and lots of different authors, lots and lots of different singers who are singing the story of the Trojan War. And so you're going to get variations and differences amongst the versions of the story. And so one version is that he was taken to the river Styx by his mother, Thetis, and dipped. Now, no one can touch the river Styx without dying, but if you're doing it in a ceremonious way, then you can make all parts of the person baby that you are dipping in to the river Styx immortal. Not wanting to get her own parts of her hand into the Styx, everything was dipped into it except for Achilles' heel, and that's why we use that term even nowadays to indicate a person's weakness as their Achilles heel. And so it is then he's given is Achilles to a centaur, the oldest and wisest of all centaurs, named Chiron. You can see Chiron here, who teaches to Achilles all of the things that a warrior and a cultured man would need to know, human, and that is how to even play the lyre, how to fight, how to make wise decisions, and the like. Then he was later sent to live with the shepherd Lycomedes. The reason being is that there was a prophecy concerning Achilles' life. He had one of two options. His life was either going to be very long but boring, or it was going to be short and glorious. Of course, Thetis, wanting her son's life to be long, even if it is boring, wants him to live, and thus what would be a more boring life than that of a shepherd? So he grows up in Lycomedes' house, falls in love with Lycomedes' daughter Didamia, and they have a child together. Well, when the Greeks came to Lycomedes looking for Achilles, Lycomedes, knowing that he could not easily give up the boy to a life of glorious war that would then be short, dresses Achilles up as a girl, one of his own daughters, and says, "There is no man here, only my daughters." Now, when the Greeks looked them over, they noticed that one of the daughters looked rather peculiar, had an Adam's apple, bulging muscles, a little too hairy. But nevertheless, they shrugged their shoulders and went on. Odysseus, on the other hand, realized something was up, and so he returned later as a traveling salesman and offered up a bunch of goods for the daughters to look at. All of the daughters were on one side looking at the stereotypical things that women or daughters and girls would want to buy. On the other side was the one peculiar daughter looking at stereotypical male things, weapons, power tools, sporting equipment. And so it was revealed by Odysseus that this was no daughter, but instead Achilles dressed up. And so Achilles now is on board and must go with his men, the Myrmidons, representing Thea, to fight in the war, the land of his father Peleus. Now, when they gather at Aulis, the winds to go to Troy were not favorable. They were being prevented from going to Troy by the goddess Artemis. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that Agamemnon was too eager, too bloodthirsty to go and kill at Troy, and he must make a sacrifice. The other is that the sacred deer of Artemis that you see here with Artemis guiding in the sky had been killed by Agamemnon. And so, when they needed to decide how and what the gods were involved, they turned to their resident seer, their resident prophet, whom they had with them named Calchas, Calchas. And Calchas revealed that there had to be a human sacrifice to appease Artemis, to atone for all the innocent blood the Greeks were going to shed at Troy. And so, what happened then was that Agamemnon himself decided that he would get his own daughter and sacrifice her. So he sends word to Clytemnestra, his wife at home, and says, "Send Iphigenia. Bring her to Aulis. She's going to marry the great warrior Achilles." But of course that was a lie and a trick, just to get his wife to send and bring his own daughter. And that is exactly what Agamemnon does. He sacrifices his own daughter, Iphigenia, in order to be able to set sail and go to Troy. Now, Clytemnestra would never forgive Agamemnon for this. And as a matter of fact, for the 10 years that now Agamemnon is going to be gone, she is going to rule over Mycenae with Agamemnon's own cousin, Aegisthus, as her lover, awaiting for Agamemnon's return. Meanwhile, on the way, a couple of things happen. One is on the island of Lemnos, Philoctetes, who possessed the bow of Heracles. Philoctetes had been the one, or in some versions of the story, Philoctetes' father had set fire to Heracles' own funeral pyre, allowing Heracles to die and go to Mount Olympus with his own father Zeus, and thus was in possession of the bow. When he was bitten by a snake, his foot began to smell horrible, gangrenous, and so the Greeks left him there. He will come back to play a role near the end of the war 10 years later. Now, there was also an incident with a man named Telephus. Telephus was wounded in a skirmish by Achilles. As they are on their way, they have to raid cities, towns, villages to get supplies. And so Telephus' wound would not heal. And so he was told, only he who can heal you is the one who has harmed you. And so they finally are allowed Achilles to heal Telephus. Telephus tells them the rest of the journey to Troy, and when they arrive, nobody jumps off the ships. That is because of the prophecy saying that the first person who jumps off the ships at Troy is guaranteed to die. Eventually, Proteslas, the brave warrior, says, "Oh, whatever, I'll be the first one to do it," and sacrifices himself, and sure enough, does not survive much long in the battle that ensues. He is rewarded by the gods to see his wife one more time on his way to the underworld, where he is joined by his wife Laodamia, who in her grief obviously takes her own life, and that then means the war is on. It begins to drag on, and as a matter of fact, it drags on for 10 years, whereupon we get to the beginning of the great story, the Iliad, in the 10th year of the war, in which a raiding party for supplies has just returned, and Achilles has the spoils of war, which include food, which include materials, but it also includes human beings, and that is when the next installment will begin.